how to kind of put this into your program. So what we want to do is remember that the early learning standards are they're not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is not something that you're going to be able to do and it's going to be done in a couple of days. It takes a little while to kind of get that under control. So what I'm going to do is give you some really practical suggestions of how to kind of get used to it and get to know it a little bit more, and move forward with that. My goals for the night is that by the end of this training, you're going to be able to describe what the New Hampshire Early Learning Standards are and what their intended use is, that you'll get familiar with the format of it and how it's organized. You'll be able to say 3 concrete ways that you can use it in your program, and 3 reasons that, or 3 ways that the standards can be a resource for you. So what I want you to do is just take a sec and go into the chat box, and everybody take 1 second and just brainstorm in your head. What's the first word that comes to your brain when you think about the New Hampshire Early Learning Standards? It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be whatever it is that you think about. Take 1 second to think about that. Just put up the first word that comes to mind. Okay, I'm going to give a couple more minutes because I only see 3 people and I know there's more than 3 of you on here. So right now I see goals, I see overwhelming, I see guidance, confusing guidance, format. And I think that that's a lot of times, those are things that I hear is sometimes people like to be super confusing, they're not sure how to read it. So hopefully by the time we end today, you're going to have a little bit more of a feeling about how to kind of tell that. It is definitely a resource, and we're going to talk about that as well. It is some guidelines, but it's really an opportunity for you to maximize every moment that you have with the kiddos that come into your program every day. So I think we got just about everybody. I'm not sure if I missed anybody, but go ahead and throw it in the chat box if we didn't. So basically, the Early Learning Standards is just a document that outlines what you should know and what do by the time they leave what are the things that I need to do to get these kiddos ready for the next level up, and what do they need to do that. So it's just a resource and a tool to kind of help you through those. When they designed the New Hampshire Early Learning Standards, they were very specific about things they thought that the standards should be and things that they thought the standards should not be. So what I want to do is I'm going to stop my share for a second and do a poll question. So if everything works out perfectly, I'm going to be able to pull up my poll. So basically, this has 2 questions in it, and basically I took all those things that they're supposed to be and all the things they're not supposed to be, and I jumbled them up, and I want you to check off all the ones in each of the questions that you think are supposed to be what the New Hampshire Learning Standards were meant to do. So let me launch that poll question, and it is in progress. You should see it. So go ahead and check off which ones you feel are right. There's no right or wrong answer. Well, right now you're just guessing and you're just trying to start to think about it. So it's okay if you don't have all the answers now. The goal is to have it by the time we're done. I'm just waiting for 4 more people to finish up on that voting, and then we'll go ahead. It's not letting you submit. All right, well, if you had a different answer, you can, Tasha, if you have a different answer, just go ahead and put them, you're more than welcome to write them in the chat box, or when we're talking, just unmute yourself and we can go and we can do it that way. I'm not sure why it's not letting you submit, although I can tell you putting these in gave me a little bit of money tonight. So I'm looking for one more person to put their stuff in. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds more, and then I'm going to close the poll. All right. So, and poll, and I'm going to share the results. So you should be able to see. So when we look at it, we said that the New Hampshire Early Learning Standards should provide a resource about children development from birth to age 5. And 8 out of 9 people said that was true, and true. It is meant to be a resource for you on children's development, and not just you. When they wrote these, they meant them to be a resource to bring people together so that families had the same language, so that teachers had the same language. And when you're talking to people outside in the larger community of early childhood, we were all kind of on the same page with the same language in it. Be a curriculum. I'm so glad nobody chose that option, because it was not meant to be a curriculum. When they wrote the early learning standards, they had to pick and choose things that went in here. Some pieces didn't really go all the way from birth to 5. Some pieces overlapped on different touching areas. So they had to be picky, because the book is already 70 pages long and they couldn't put everything under the sun in here. So it's not meant to be a curriculum. It doesn't mean that if it's not in the early learning standards, you shouldn't be teaching it in your classroom. That's not what that was intended for. That it's meant to promote a whole child approach that affirms learning and development and interrelated and build on previous learning. That's true. It was meant to be and do that. It was meant to acknowledge, honor, and embrace the tremendous diversity and variation that exists in child. It was meant to do that. They actually had this vetted out. They were very careful to make sure that this document was culturally sensitive, and they had it vetted out by professionals across the country to do that. So they really wanted to embrace how different everyone is and really make sure that this document kind of took all of that in. The next one says, be an exhaustive guide to child development and a developmental checklist. And like I just said a few minutes ago, they had to pick and choose. It was really hard to decide what was going to be in here, what wasn't going to be in here, but it's not an exhaustive list of everything. So they don't want you to use this as a curriculum or as an assessment tool, because there's other things that could be happening in your program or with your kiddos that just may not be in the standards, because they had to pick and choose. And the last one was recognize and celebrate what children learn, and to help them plan for the next stages of growth. And it is meant to do that, that this is supposed to help you plan for those next stages. It writes everything on this continuum so you can see, because we know that children develop at their own rate, and they, nobody kind of goes on the exact same path of how they're gonna learn. So they wrote this on a continuum so you could see what kiddos a little younger, a little older, were all able to be doing. And so they were hoping that would really help you, help your kids in the next stages of development. So then we had the exact same question, it should only put 6 until, that it aligns with the New Hampshire Kindergarten Readiness Indicators, which align with the New Hampshire College and Career Readiness Standards. And so only 50% of the people said yes to this, but that is actually true. I know it sounds weird that these align with New Hampshire College and Career Readiness standards, but it does. So they did put, they have the early learning standards, and then in this book, they also have the New Hampshire Kindergarten Readiness Standards. So again, you can see that development on a continuum, what those kiddos are supposed to do from birth all the way into when they're going into kindergarten. Provide a list of resources for information about children's learning and development. That's also true. Be an assessment tool to determine children's eligibility for various programs and services. This was not meant to be an assessment tool. Again, it leaves pieces of child development out. They couldn't be all inclusive. It was never meant to say, oh my gosh, this kiddo isn't doing this, this, and this. We can't move them up into the next room, because we know that kids develop at their own rate. So there's going to be some kids who are doing super great in one area, but in another area, they might need some supports and some extra services there. So it wasn't meant to be an assessment. To guide the choices of developmentally appropriate practice, teaching strategies, and assessment is 100% true. We're going to talk a lot in a little bit about choosing your teaching strategies. And this can help you choose the curriculum that you're going to use and the assessment tools you're going to use. Be an instrument to collect statewide data. This was not meant to collect information on children. It's meant to be a resource to families, to teachers, and to anybody who works and loves with children. And the last one says that it's meant to be permanent and unchanging, and that is not true. They wanted this document to be fluid. They know that over time, as more research comes out, that this is going to need to be changed and updated to reflect new information that comes. So let me close that out. And now I'll go back to my screen share, put the PowerPoint back up. It's almost like it's working exactly how it's supposed. And so if it'll let me change the slide, there we go. So when they organized the early learning standards, they broke it into different kind of pieces. The tricky part is that they use this jargon words. So I'm going to kind of go over the words, and then I'm going to show you where it all is and talk about that for a second. So the biggest part is they have these domains, and there's 5 domains. And if you were looking in the book, they're color coded by what each domain is. So the domains are the really, really big overarching topics. Language development is really, really, really big topics. So they took those gigantically huge topics and they broke them down more into what they call strands. But the strands are still pretty big chunks of information. Even though they're smaller than the domains, there's still a topic that can break into lots more topics. And those other topics are called constructs. When I talk about if you wanted to label something with early learning standards, I would be talking about labeling it with a construct. The constructs help to define the strands help to define the domain. But really a construct is just one little piece of information that you would be teaching a kiddo that's in your class or in your program. So then those constructs are broken down into what they call indicators of progress. And what those indicators of progress are is what that might look like for different age groups, what kiddos might be thinking, what they might be feeling, what they might be doing with that specific construct. And so they did that on the continuum so that you can see what it looks like at birth all the way up to 4 or 5. So I want to kind of show you some pieces. Let me just move this little guy up here. I want to show you some pieces of what the early learning standards look like and how to just where all the information falls on it. So I'm going to get a little spotlight. So if you look up here at the top, this is the domain. If you want to open your book, if this is small for you and you're having trouble reading it, if you open up to page 19, that's the page that I have up on the PowerPoint right now. So at the top up here, they have the domain. The blue sections, any section that's blue, is language development and emergent literacy. Is the blue section. If you go right below that, they have this guiding question. That was to help providers and it's to help parents kind of think, what does that really mean? So for this one, it's how do children develop an understanding of language and use it to communicate with others? If you jump over here, down on this side, they talk about those strands. So we said that the strands help to define that domain. The domain, language development or emergent literacy, is that really, really big topic. And then these strands help to define that. So we've got, wow, but I can't read it because it's so small. We've got literacy comprehension, we've got nonverbal communication, communication concepts, and verbal expressions. But again, those are still some bigger topics. So what they did is they took that strand and they broke them up into these constructs. Okay, sometimes a strand will have 3 or 4 constructs. Sometimes it only has 1. It really depends on what that particular strand was. But you can see right here under listening comprehension, they have receptive verbal communication. And then, as I said before, they break it down into this. All this stuff right here is the indicators of progress. And so they have, what does it look from birth to 9 months? What does it look from 9 months to 18 months? 18 to 24, 24 to 30, 30 to 3, and then at the 3-year-old age. So you can kind of see, because again, not everybody develops in the same level. So you might have some kiddos in your class, if you were teaching a 3-year-old room, who are doing things over in this column, but you might have a couple kids who are here or maybe even here. And so that's just kind of gives you a way of what that might look like for different kids in your class. The continuum only goes from birth to 3 on this page, but if you were to flip the page, if it'll flip the page for me, I think it's because I blew it up. Oh, it skipped it, there we go. If you flip the page to page 20, they have the 4-year-old domain. So it looks, a lot of pieces on it are very, very similar with a couple of really big differences. So again, they still have this language development, the domain up at the top. They still have that guiding question. They still have the strands over here on the left, broken down further into the constructs. It is notable to say that some strands, when you get into the constructs, as you move up from the age levels from birth to 5, that some of those pieces, the kids master them way before they get to 5. So you might see it on 1 from the birth to 3-year-old and not see it in the 4-year-old page. Some of those were ones that when they said, should we put these in, should we not put them in, were some of the ones they weeded out. Some of the ones that they weeded out were ones that touched on some constructs very gently on one piece, or they might have touched on another one. So that's how they kind of picked and chose. It wasn't easy, but that's kind of how they came to where they were. So then again, you have these constructs, and here's your indicators of progress. The big noticeable difference is it also has the New Hampshire Kindergarten Readiness Indicators. So you can see, what am I doing in my pre-K room, and what do I need to do to get them ready to go into that kindergarten year? And that's all kind of on this sheet. So what I want to do now is just take a second and know layout and the function a little better. So I have a little bit of a quiz, like a scavenger hunt to do. The first parts are all on page 36, the first couple questions. I have it up here if you didn't have access to it, but if you didn't, the last 5 questions, you have to flip through the book. So if you don't have it, you want to grab that URL that I put into the chat box to open it up so that you can see it on your computer, and then just shrink the Zoom screen. So the first question, and so I want you to take yourselves off mute for a minute, and you can just call this out. Okay, so I want to give everybody just a second. The mute button, if you look at your picture on the right, you should be able to see a little piece that says, if you go up into the top right corner, unmute me. Okay. So, all right, so the first question is, what is the domain on page 36? So go ahead. You can just yell it out when you see the domain.
Cognitive development.
Exactly. Thank you. All right. So what are the 2 strands that you see on page 36?
Symbolic representation and effective function.
An executive function. So please note, remember when we looked at the page before, I said some strands might have 1 construct and some strands have more. So if you look at executive function, it actually has 3 constructs on this page. So just a note, something to note. Also know that this is a different color. This is cognitive development approaches to learning. So it's green. So anything that falls into the cognitive development section is a green color. All right, so the next question is, list the 4 constructs that are on the page. So if one person can yell at one and then somebody can yell at the other, I really just want you to kind of get used to where these things are so you can find them.
Working, memory, and focus and attention.
Perfect, that's one.
Adaptability of thought processes, planning, and intentionality.
Perfect, that's
Representational
there's
process.
two more. Perfect. And the last one?
Motivation. I can't read it.
And it's a little small, I'm sorry. Motivation, initiative, and persist. Thank you for trying though, I really appreciate that. Motivation, initiative,
Okay.
persistence. All right, so hard copy of your book, or you're gonna wanna have the online version because we're going to ask a couple other questions that aren't on a specific page. I want you to flip through the book a little bit. So the first question is, if you flip through the standards and you find the standards that are yellow, what domain is represented by the yellow color?
I don't know.
Physical development.
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Physical development and health.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So physical development, I'm trying to find on my book what page that starts on.
Oh, there you go.
I have
40.
40.
Yep, it starts so on page 40, and you can notice that that strand is yellow. Okay, the purple strand is aesthetic, creative expression and aesthetic appreciation, and orange is social emotional. So they tried to make it a little easier to organize it for you by color coding it. So if you were to go to cognitive, to the development, to the green one, how many strands in total are there? So there's multiple pages. So I want you to tell me, how many strands does cognitive development have?
four.
You'll notice when you look at the green sections, there's 3 different shades of green, because although cognitive development, it's such a big topic that they actually broke it into 3 sections. They have science and social studies, approaches to learning, and then they also have the last one, which is in front of me, early numeracy. So how many strands are in all of the cognitive sections? Starts on page 25. Well, really 26.
26.
Three,
12.
11,
13,
12.
You, so were you counting? So I counted, and that could be a difference because I have a much higher number, but I was counting the strands on every page. And did you count them on the 0 to 3 and the 4 to 5, or just the one section?
There's 8.
8, 9, 40,
18.
41, 42, 46.
I didn't have 46. I had 29. When I go through and count them all, it's possible that when you had the 49, you might have been counting constructs, the one next to it. The strands are in white. The constructs are in that kind of
Oh, okay.
right next to it. So, which is why we're doing this. So you can kind of know all the different pieces, because you can't get to know the standards until you can read this format. Some people look at it. I know I'm one of the fewer early childhood people who see like mathematical graphs and get super happy and data's like, woohoo, but not everybody has that kind of thinking. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to the graphs and the charts. My next question is, what is the New Hampshire Kindergarten Readiness Indicator that aligns with the domain physical development and health and the strand body awareness and control? So you're going to be looking in the yellow section, and you're looking for the strand body awareness and control, and telling me what New Hampshire Kindergarten Indicator relates to that.
Physical development and health.
Yep, it's in physical development and health.
Coordinates movement to perform simple tasks.
Domains.
Absolutely, it's on page 46. Domain 6, element B, balance and control, coordinates movements to perform simple tasks. So that's the that's the kindergarten readiness that goes with it. If you flip to page 21, can you tell me how many strands are on that page?
How many what?
Strands.
41.
Page, which page again?
21.
Oh, 20.
21. Page 21.
One.
4.
Okay. So remember that the strands are they're the ones that go vertical. So it would be 1. It's the one that's in white. It's emergent reading. There's 4 constructs. And if you look, like, the word constructs is right above that column
I
where the
understand.
strand
Okay.
is on the side. Does that
Oh,
make
so
sense?
2 of
Yes.
them?
So
Yeah,
it's
it's
just the
one.
emergent reading.
So there's
Yeah.
1 strand, 4 constructs. So the strand is emergent reading, and the constructs are participating in language and literacy activities, narratives and story sense, comprehension and interpretation, and interest and appreciation of reading. Okay?
Okay.
And if you flip to page 39, tell me what the guiding question is.
How do young children develop and use strategies to learn?
Perfect. So that's approaches to learning. So that kind of, I don't even know what color to call that, but that shade of green is approaches to learning. And that's how do young children develop and use strategies to learn. So perfect. Thank you so much. You guys did awesome. We're going to move forward. So now we want to start talking about, I want this to flip, there we go. Now we're going to start talking about how we can take the early learning standards and use them in our practices in our classroom. And how can they really be a tool and a resource for us? So they can be, if you think about the conversations that you have every day with the kiddos in your program, they can really be a tool to help you be intentional. If you go in knowing what your goals are for the day, I want my kids to walk away knowing this today, this week, this month, this year, then they can start having conversations with them that are extremely intentional. And every moment, from the second those kids walk into your building, the second their foot hits the door, to the minute their feet leave that building, every single part of that day is a learning opportunity. It's all part of the curriculum. Everything that happens during that day is a moment where those kids can be learning. But when you think about conversations and the standards being a resource for you, it's not just with your conversations with kids, but it can also be a resource for you with the conversations you have with parents and families, but also with your coworkers. And we're going to touch a little bit more on that in a second when we get to some further slides. When you think about the environment, your environment should be a second teacher. So that way you set your classroom up should really be another way to help those kiddos learn. So thinking about, again, using the standards as a resource and thinking about what are my goals for the week, the day, the month, the year, is my environment set up to help those kids do that, to help them learn the things that I want them to learn then. It can be a resource for you in planning when you're setting the stage, whether you're actively planning a lesson or you're just setting the stage for them to do their own learning and to kind of take it. It can also be for you in your observations. When we take our informal observations and take notes on them and start to use them to make evaluations, they become something a little more formal. And we want to be able to use those, and the standards can give us something that can, instead of comparing what Johnny did to Susie, we can say, well, this is what we know is developmentally appropriate and what could be happening in a 3-year-old classroom or a 2-year-old classroom or a 4-year-old classroom. And it helps us be a little more objective and not biased in our observations. Can everybody do me a favor? I know I asked you to unmute yourselves, but now I'm going to ask you to mute yourselves because there's a little bit of background noise going on. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourselves in a little bit, but that just kind of helps cut back. And I'm going to lose my voice anyway by the end of the night. It just helps me to kind of move forward with that. So now let's talk about those conversations. Oops, and I think I skipped a page by accident. So every conversation that you have with a child should be intentional. We want to support their development. with what we're doing with them. So when somebody goes into the block tower, the block area, and they knock down that block tower, and we tell them to go sit over in the library to kind of calm themselves down, did we miss the boat on a conversation that we could have had to teach them something? We want to think about every conversation we have should be intentional. Why did that kiddo knock the blocks down? Is it because he doesn't know, or she doesn't know how to enter into play? So if I knock the block tower down, they all have to start over again. They'll include me. It's a teachable moment. So we want to make sure that every time we talk to those kids, we're really thinking about the words that we're using and the things that we're saying. We want to inspire critical thinking skills in them, and we want to invite conversation with those kids. All right. When we have conversations with our families, we communicate with our families in lots of different ways, and it's changing even from when I began teaching. You know, we send home newsletters, but now we have Facebook, and we've got Remind or Brightwheel apps, and all the email, and all these different ways to communicate with parents. And so we want to make sure that we're building relationships when we have those, so that when things do come up with parents, we have that bond together, so you can really talk to those kids about the things that are going on, or the parents about what's going on with their kiddos. So we want to be really intentional. Plus, you want to promote your field. You know, a lot of times when I was a director, I would have parents come up to me and say, well, what is my kiddo learning when they're doing this? And I could say, well, you know, your child might have spent 3 hours in dramatic play, but if they were in dramatic play for 3 hours, they just weren't pretending to make a cake. There was a whole lot more going on there, and a lot of learning going on. So it's an opportunity for you to say, this is what we did, but this is what they learned. So you want to just take that and really be intentional about your conversations. And using the learning standards can help you when you're doing parent-teacher conferences, or getting you on the same page, using the same language. You know, when I taught threes before I became a director, and I apologize, I will use 3-year-olds as a lot of examples, because that was probably my favorite age to teach ever. And I've taught all the way up to 2nd grade. But I used to ask my families in the first week or two when they were there, what do you really want your kiddos to get out of their time with me? What are you looking for? And inevitably, every once in a while, you know, maybe not every year, but they get, I want my 3-year-old to be able to read, because I saw that my baby can read thing, and I want my 3-year-old to read. So if you use the early learning standards, they can be a resource and a tool to talk about, here are the things we're going to do to help and build up the stepping stones to reading. But, you know, it may not be developmentally appropriate for your kiddo to be reading at 3, but you can use this as a tool to kind of show parents and get everybody on the same page about what's appropriate developmentally, and to give that common language and be really intentional about the conversations you have. Then there's the conversations that you have with your coworkers and your peers. So as a director, I would have a lot of times it's usually around transition time, I would have people come up to me and tell me their thoughts about, you know, what they thought their kiddos should know going into the next age group, or what they should, you know, all those different pieces. And what I found out is that sometimes those expectations weren't always developmentally appropriate. You know, my 1-year-old teacher really, really wanted everybody to come up using a spoon, because it's super hard to try to feed everybody simultaneously if they can't use a spoon, but also not really practical to tell me that every 1-year-old needs to use a spoon as they all develop at their own levels. So that using the standards can really be a helpful guide to kind of get everybody on the same page and have that same language, and make sure they're all, you know, having realistic and meaningful conversations about what's going to happen. And it can help you have best practices when you do that. So what I want to do now, and I will tell you that this is my first time trying this, so we'll see how it goes, is that I want to break you out into, I'm going to stop my share, hold on, and I'm going to share something else, because I prepped it beforehand, so hopefully it's working. All right, not this one. Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put you into breakout rooms, which essentially puts you in a separate room where a couple of you can talk at the same time. So you might want to unmute yourself. And what I want you to do is to go in. You should be able to see my screen, but I'm going to go over the 3 scenarios just in case you can't. But you're supposed to be able to see my screen. But I want you to think about what would you say if you were using the early learning standards, keeping the early learning standards in mind, and also thinking about really intentionally, how would you talk, the first scenario is, what would you say to a parent that says, my child's been playing in blocks all day? What are they learning? Why are they there all day? Can't you get them to go someplace else? What would you say to that parent? Thinking about the early learning standard and using that as a resource for how you might have those conversations. The second scenario is your preschool teacher comes, you're a toddler teacher, and a preschool teacher comes to you and says, I want the kids to come into my classroom knowing their letters. How are you going to have that conversation, and how can think about the standards and how they might be a tool for you in that conversation? The last one is you're in a classroom and you're focusing on emotional expression, and you notice that a child walks away from the area and they're clearly upset. Their arms are crossed, they have a scowl on their face. What kind of conversation could you have with them that's intentionally, that's maybe keeping those early learning standards? What is your goal if you're thinking about emotional expression? What kind of conversations can you have to help those kiddos? So what I'm going to do is break you out into those breakout rooms. And when I do that, in a perfect world, you are going to be able to talk. I can't find where that is at the moment though, so hold on. Yeah, go ahead. There it is. I'm gonna stop my share for a sec, and then I'm gonna go to the breakout rooms. So if everything works well, I'm gonna put you in 3 rooms. Please choose one person to share back out to the group. I'm only gonna have you share about one scenario, but I want you to talk about all the scenarios, but please just choose one person to do that. So I've created my breakout rooms. I'm gonna give you about 4 to 5 minutes to talk. And then it should automatically move you right back in to the, should automatically move you right back into this room. But if it doesn't, after like 4 or 5 minutes, come back to me if it doesn't make you do it. And it should also give you a 60-second countdown when you're getting close to the end. So I'm opening up the rooms. You should be able to go. Shannon, are you joined? It seems like you're having problems. And Tasha, it seems like you are as well. Tasha, are you able to join?
How do I get in there?
You should have a spot. If you look down on the bottom where it tells you to just join a room, let me see if I can move you to a different room. All right. I think I might have just put you in a different room. See if you can join that one.
Reaction, record, chat. Is it in participants or?
It shouldn't be. It should just be like join the room. It should just send you. It was supposed to actually automatically take you there.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Well, let's have the conversation between ourselves.
Okay.
We'll go from there. So if you had a parent come in and tell you about playing with the blocks all day, they have a little kiddo, that's all they ever do, what would you say to them?
I would tell them that that's obviously an area of interest for the child. And I would probably have them look at it from a perspective of what his future may look like, given that he's a builder, he's hands-on, he enjoys hands-on things, and you just never know where that's going to take him. So don't discourage that. That may be something that may take him to, his future career, and it may just be something that he finds calming, and he may find, developmentally motivational for him. It motivates him because he gets an opportunity to play with the blocks and to, obviously there's something that he's acting out in his mind and his body, and, because he likes building, so I think don't take that creativity from him,
Right,
so.
right. And I dare say that if a child is playing in blocks for hours, they're not just building a tower, that
Right.
there's more going on there. Not only are they working with their fine motor skills and their hand-eye coordination, but there's critical thinking and problem solving going on. And imaginative play, and there's probably some social emotional stuff going on, because I doubt that they're the only child playing in the block area.
Right.
Right.
So there's, bringing attention, if you're thinking with that other lens, like, look at all these things that they're learning. So yes, they might be playing with blocks for 3 hours, but there's so much learning that's happening while they're there.
Mhm.
So now, what would you say to that preschool teacher who tells you, we have about a minute, just so you know, what would you say to that preschool teacher who tells you that she wants all of your kids to know their letters by the time they go?
I would probably tell her good luck with that, because when we think about how the mind and the brain is developed, each child develops at their own pace. So you can't teach one child to get their letters the same way you can teach another child. Some may learn through song, some may learn through play, touch, draw, things like that. So the expectations can't be the same across the board, because they learn different and they receive the information different and they process it differently. So I would tell her that that's not fair. It's not fair to the fact that we're supposed to meet children where they are. If they're not there yet, we can't make them be there because they're going to your class,
Absolutely. And, if there was pushback, you can always pull out the standards and be like, look, like here are the things that I can do. And sure, I'm sure there are going to be some kids coming in knowing some of it. And there's going to be some who don't, and that's okay too. So we have less than 60 seconds. We have 53 seconds. So let's just do the last one. So if you're focusing on some social emotional pieces, and what type of conversation would you have with that kiddo who is upset?
Couldn't hear.
I probably would first acknowledge that they're upset and that it's okay to be upset. Is there something they like to talk about? Talk to me about right now. Encourage them if they need a moment, they can have that moment. So if some kids like squishy, some like other little items when they're upset. And, after that, encourage them to come and have a conversation with me so that we can figure out why they're upset, so we can address it so they don't remain upset, or it don't re-brew later when he's with the friend that he may or may not be upset with or about, so just to find out what's going on and support him in that area and how he can communicate, how it's making him feel to his friends, if it's a friend issue, or just if they're just sad, they're just sad, so just getting them to talk about their feelings and what's going on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, if everybody could go back, hopefully everybody chose one person to report out. So can I have people who are in room 1, can I have somebody report out on scenario 1?
I have no idea what room we were in.
Oh,
I think we were in 2.
I don't know either.
No, I couldn't hear.
I probably should have said look for that, but this is my first time using it. So
I could not hear.
You couldn't hear? Okay. So did you use the chat box?
No.
All right, well, that's okay. We're going to talk about it now anyway. Can I have one person who wants to talk about what you would say to that family who's worried about their kiddo playing in blocks all the time?
I was in a group. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was in a group with Beth, and we were just in group 2. And we talked about how the block area actually reaches so much more than just playing with blocks. You can bring social emotional into it with sharing the blocks with other friends and, what are you building? What are you creating? We also talked about the math aspect of it with counting and the different shapes and the different colors, and then reaching language and talking about throwing out some new vocabulary with the blocks as well.
Awesome. I can't actually see who's talking, I think, but thank you so much.
Michaela, I'm sorry.
No, Michaela, it's fine. Because I'm sharing my screen, it's hard to see everybody. If
Yeah.
you're not the person talking right now, would you mind muting yourself just because there's a little bit of background noise? And I totally get it because my kiddos are hidden downstairs with my husband being like, please don't come upstairs. But can I have someone who wants to report out on scenario 2?
Don't forget, I gotta leave early. It's school tonight.
Do anybody want to report out on scenario 2? There should have been 3 people ready to report out.
Oh, I couldn't. I think we're having some issues where people are freezing and then it's.
It is tricky when we have, technology is tricky, and you know, when you have some internet connections. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, at first you were frozen
So,
on my end.
so it can be your internet connection's not stable, but the second one was talking about that toddler teacher. Do I have anybody who wants to share out about that? You know, what would you say to that toddler teacher when they say, hey,
Okay,
yes,
I was in a breakout room for a minute. I don't know what happened.
that's all right. You're back now. We're good. So go ahead, Tasha, do you want to share what we were talking about for that toddler preschool teacher one?
Or, what was scenario 2 again?
That was someone with the toddler teacher and the preschool teacher and knowing all their letters.
Oh, okay. So we discussed that it wouldn't be appropriate for her to expect all the children to know their letters when they come over to her classroom, simply because not all children learn at the same pace, nor are all the children on the same level when they enter your classroom. So you may have had those children, some children from the year before, so they may know things and be better, you know, suited with your environment and things like that. However, you get new people in, they're not going to be on the same level as your children before. So when we think about meeting children where they are, you know, we're not supposed to force them to be in a level that's unreasonable. And another thing was shared is that to share, if a teacher expects that, then share the standards with them, letting them know that this is how the standards are and this is how we teach. We teach to the standard, you know, that, and basically being fair to each child and giving them the best opportunity.
Thank you, Tasha. I appreciate you sharing out. All right, so we have the last one was the teacher-child interaction. Do I have somebody who could share out about what they would say to that kiddo? Anybody?
What was the scenario again?
This is the one where you have that, you're talking about emotional expression in your classroom. That's the construct, one of your goals that you're working on. And you have a kiddo who clearly walks away from an area upset. They're stomping, their arms are crossed, they've got that face that, you know, is letting you know there's something going on. So what kind of conversation can you have with that kiddo? Being really intentional, knowing that one of your goals is to be working on emotional expression.
Yeah, so acknowledging how they feel, first of all, and that it's okay to be upset about something, and offer them an opportunity to express themselves, and encourage word choices. So you may start with, I'm upset because, you know, to help them, because some children don't always have those words, and so you encourage by giving them some word choices. They may or may not take them, and they may want to say something else, but it's one way to kind of get them to begin to tell you what's wrong, you know, or personally just give them their personal space. If they need a few minutes, then you give them that time. Say, if you need a few minutes, just let me know when you're ready to talk, because I'm here to listen for, you know, listen and see what we can do to fix it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Just as
We were in I was in group 3 and we talked about this one as well. We had kind of first thought, just kind of observe, see what kind of is happening, you know, let the child have a moment by themselves, and then kind of go to the child and be like, oh, you know, what happened, bud? What's going on? I see that your face is showing me that you're upset. What was kind of going on when you were playing or whatever. And then kind of seeing if maybe the kids can get together and do a conflict resolution that way, or maybe, you know, bringing them over and saying, oh, hey, Tommy, you know, you really hurt so-and-so's feelings. Do you see the look on their face? And kind of use it as like the learning that way.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. So just as a heads up, in case you didn't know, if you look at the bottom, you have reactions. So if you liked what someone says, you can always give them like a thumbs up or a hand clap, just so you know that those reactions are down there. So where I'm going to go back to sharing my PowerPoint. Oops, not that one. That one. All right. So, and let's talk. So really what I want you to take away with your conversation piece and the early learning standards is really be intentional. think about what your goal is. What are you hoping that that family walks away with that conversation? What are you hoping that other teacher walks away with? What are you hoping that child walks away with? And just be super intentional and use this as a resource to help you kind of have those conversations. And, you know, sometimes when it's hard to have, you know, specifically when it's a coworker and you know, those conversations can be challenging because you have to see that person every day. But you can use this as a, you know, a ground where you kind of come together and you're on the same playing field. So the next part is that environment piece. So we want you to think about your environment being another classroom. It should really speak to what you're trying to teach the kiddos. So, you know, you want to set that stage by setting your environment up. So think about what are the things you want your kids to learn this week, this month, this year, you know, and is your room set up for that? If you're really trying to foster friendships and social emotional connections, and you're really trying to work on that conflict resolution, does it make sense that your room is set up that only kids, maybe 1 or 2 kids can go to every area? How is your room set up? Do you have that soft space? Do you have the hard spaces? Do you have that quiet space that maybe when that kiddo gets upset? How is your room set up to really support the learning you want to happen? And if it's not set up to support that, you might want to arrange your furniture. And the room arrangement you start your year with may not be the room arrangement that you keep all year because your goals change. And sometimes you have to move your room around to kind of fit that. Think about the materials that you put out. So as a director, I definitely have walked through classrooms where I've seen materials, you know, where kiddos can't reach it or where they're kind of not, you know, you get that toddler room. I used to have a teacher who, you know, you get those kiddos who take every bucket and they dump it out and then they move to the next bucket and they dump it out and they move to the next bucket and they dump it out. And before you know it, in 5 minutes, your room looks like a tornado hit and there's like 4 million pieces on the floor. So be intentional about it, what you're doing. Think about, oh, well, I know that I currently have a dumper in my room. Maybe I'm going to only put blue materials out. I'm going to not take them away so that they don't have things to play with, but I'm going to put only blue things out so that we can talk about the colors as we're doing it. Just be intentional about the materials that you place out for the kiddos to use. You just want to think about how you're setting that stage. Does the materials I have out really meet the goals that I'm trying to accomplish? You know, if you're trying to work on one-to-one correspondence, but you don't have any counters or anything like that that they can do those pieces with, you might want to think about what you have available for the kids. And then you want to think about your displays. And I think of displays in 2 different ways. I think of displays like, hey, this is what the kids have done. I took pictures of them and they're up on the walls, or this is student work that the kids have done and I put them up on the walls. But I also think about the learning displays as what am I have on the walls that shows what I'm teaching. Your room should really reflect the things that you want your kids to work on. So if you're learning about families, doesn't it make sense to have pictures all over your room about families? Or if you're talking about different types of houses, doesn't it make sense to show different types of houses around your room? I went into a classroom once where I was doing an observation and they were working on numbers, totally normal, but she's asking them to identify things and she's talking to them and she didn't have numbers up anywhere in her room. So there wasn't even a guiding point where she could point to the wall and be like, oh, look, there's the number 2. And then we can count it out. So just think about what are the things you're trying to teach and does your room reflect that learning? Because the environment should really reflect it. So I want to take a second. I'm going to blow this up for a minute. I'm going to stop my share because it's easier for me when I see everybody when we're doing things. I want you to take a second and think about if you were designing a room, if you're a theme, or if you were talking about families, what would you want? I want you to put in the chat box 5 things that you would want in your room as part of the environment that would help you teach that skill or would help your kids learn about that concept, I guess is the best way. So go ahead and jump into the chat box and write 5 things that you would want. I love it. So somebody wrote doll houses and family pictures, her family pictures, books about families, large tables for family style eating. I love that. I didn't even think about that when I was going through my 5 in my head. That was not one that I thought of, and that's a great idea. Pictures of the children with their families, pictures of families that reflect their own families, diverse families, loose parts, opportunities to create a book about themselves, discuss the differences. I love it. These are great ideas. Posters that show families, doll houses, books. Dollhouse, dramatic playbooks. I love it. These are great ideas. Baby dolls. You know, and I really like that I saw some like pictures of diverse families, because not every family is the same anymore. And so I love that you said not only the kiddos in your classroom, but other families as well, to really kind of draw out some, and your personal family, because it brings that piece of community in when you start to do that. So these are some really great answers. It looks like I'm going to give about 30 more seconds to see if anybody else has anything else they want to put in. And then I want to do that one more time when we talking about, oh, there we go. We got a big one. Pictures of kiddos with their families, doll houses and dolls, dramatic play with dress ups. I love it. Family books, pictures of different sign language for family members. Books, blocks, dress up dolls, posters, family oriented setup dolls, children family photos that reflect the families, what their families look like. So really, really great ideas. Now I want you to take a second and think in your brains about what would you, if you could set up in your environment the perfect quiet area, what would that look like? And just write me a sentence or two description of that and put it into the chat box. So what would that perfect quiet area look like in your head? So I see cozy cushions and comfortable blankets, stuffed animals, books, calm down kits. I love that. I need to know more about a calm down kit. Sensory items, books, blankets, and pillows. Cozy blankets and pillows, lights that could be dimmed, soft music, white noise machine. Some great answers. Some sensory friendly area with pillows, calm down sensory bottles, quiet activity with some dividers to separate the area from the room safely. Perfect, I love it. Soft space that could be cozy in a way where you feel concerned, or calm down tools, books, stuffed animals. Area that is simple and free of clutter. I totally agree with that. I am someone who does not work well when there's a lot of clutter in my environment. And it's the first thing I do when I'm starting to feel stressed, is straighten out my environment so I can feel calm. Window, near a window, options with book, music, and headphones. That's great. Soft floor, pillow, soft light, sensory toys, quiet activities. Great, great answers. I'm going to give 30 seconds in case somebody has one more, something else they want to do. And then we'll start talking about being intentional in our planning. They have pictures of their families there. That's a great idea. All right. So I'm going to go back and share my screen. Thank you so much for doing that. You guys did great answers. And let me just click here. There we go. All right. So then we want to think about being intentional with the planning that we do. And we want to be purposeful and really deliberate about what we're doing. So when we think about planning, we want to think about how much of our day is child-directed and how much of our day is teacher-directed. Because we really, when we look at that scale, there really should be a tip to where there's more child-directed activities than teacher-led activities. It's not saying that teacher-led activities don't have a purpose, because they do, but we really want to make sure that the scale is definitely tipped and there's more child-directed activities. We know that children learn best when they're actively engaged, and research shows that they typically are more actively engaged when they've chosen what they're doing. So when we talk about planning and doing that intentionally, we think about what we want those goals to be, whether we're pulling them from the standards or from other curriculums that we use or wherever we're pulling those. We have those goals in mind and we want to set the stage. So my thoughts are is that some of the day, we want to set the stage with maybe specific activities we have out, but you also want to just set the environment, which I think is just another huge part of planning. Some of the best activities I had were things that I laid out and then the kids took them in completely different directions. And it wasn't that, and they were some of the best things I've ever seen happen in my classroom, and it wasn't something I planned. It was something that the kids totally organically brought about themselves. So you want to just think about how you're doing it. And when you're watching for learning, realize just because they didn't take it in the direction that you wanted them to take it or you thought they were going to take it, doesn't mean that learning's not happening. You know, but it's those questions that we ask when we set the stage and we put those environments. When we're talking about families, what are you going to put in your sensory table? What are you going to put in these different areas? What materials are you going to have out for them, even if they're exploring it and doing it in their own way? So I want you to take a second and think about when you're setting your planning for your classroom. And I've also seen the teachers who are coming to the day and say, oh, we're going to take this off the shelf. And that's what we're doing today. My goal is that if you're doing the early learning standard training is that we would have a little more intentionality behind the activities, that we know that these are the things we want the kids to learn, whether it's a planned activity or we're just putting the materials out for them to explore, we still have a goal with what we're looking for them to do. So tell me, where do you get the ideas of what you're going to teach? And you can just unmute yourself and call it out or put it in the chat box, whichever's easier for you. But I want to know, where do you get those ideas? All right, let me open the chat box.
I'll go ahead and share.
I love it. Thank you.
You know, I have a home daycare, so I have a wide range of ages. So I try to pick things that allow me to encompass lots of ages because that's my life. So for the summer, this week we're doing birds. So we're doing 2 weeks of everything. So birds, because they're all fascinated with birds right now. So I figured, well, that's a great one to do in this time of year. And we're going to do insects. We're going to do camping. We're going to do reptiles. And we're going to do our backyard because we have a wooded area behind us. So I figured we could do all kinds of stuff with, you know, that. So I was just trying to think, okay, this summer's probably going to be a little crazy. Who knows who's going to be here, who's not going to be here. I also put some thought into, like, what things do I have that are easy to clean? You know, that'll fit into those categories. So that was kind of my thinking. I just started, you know, putting that together.
Yeah, and especially right now with the COVID, there's a whole nother layer of,
yeah,
how do I do this? Because something that I might have had feathers in my sensory table, would I want that now?
Yeah, would I even want a sensory, do I even want a sensory table?
Exactly.
You know, so
there are definitely pieces. In the chat box, somebody said they do it by children's interests. They allow the child to guide some of the ideas in the curriculum, which sounds like you said kids love birds, so you were doing the same kind of thing. Also drives my ideas. They say we do an overall theme for the month and then break it down into weekly topics to find things that fit to them. Themes for the world, for example, due to COVID-19, we're seeing a lot of community helpers. That makes sense. So that might be a great theme to keep with the children comfortable. So yeah, I love that I hear like you're taking, you know, what's going on with the kiddos and kind of making that work and building that into the other pieces. So now I want to think about, I'm going to read you something. And normally I would hand it to you, but I tried to put it up on the screen and it was really a hot mess. It was just way, way too small. So I just have to find it because I'm not sure where I put it in this mess of papers that I have going on in my room. So here we go. So give me a second. I want to do this. I'm going to read this to you and then I'm going to give you some different scenarios in poll questions, and I'm going to have you think about how you react to that. Because the way we choose, the strategies that we choose to use when we help children definitely affects the way or the play that is happening in the classroom. So I really want you to think about this. This scenario is promptly something that every one of you have seen if you've been in the field for any length of time. But you have 3 4-year-old boys are invited by their teacher to sort colored bears into the round sorting trays with multiple compartments. As long as the teacher's there with them, the boys cooperate into the sorting activity, talking about the colors of the bears as they sort them. As she moves on after 5 or 6 minutes to help in another area of the room, the interaction with the bears changes. Hey, I know, says Alex. Let me see who can throw them into that tray. The boys move the trays to the opposite side of the table and they begin to throw the bears. Their initial throws involve aiming into the small compartment, but as the bears start to fly across the table, they land in the compartments, but then some of them bounce out again, or they fall onto the floor with the force of the throw, and the boys are laughing, and they continue to throw the bears harder and harder, and their laughter grows louder and louder by the minute, and soon the bears are flying across the table onto the floor, and the boys have this high-pitched laughter, and they pound on the table as they lie across it with their hands. As a preschool teacher, I can tell you I probably saw something similar to that happen like every other day. So the way you handle that and the way you approach that really affects the learning that's going to happen. So I have a poll question with 4 different scenarios or 4 different ways that a teacher could handle that. And there's probably a million different ways that a teacher could take that on. But what I want to do is I want you to kind of think about, what do you think the goal of each of those activities was? So let me get the poll question out for you. Oh, good gravy, it didn't come up. Well, that's unfortunate. All right, plan B. It's a good thing I had them on paper. So the first one is that the teacher may choose to model. Maybe she'll move over to the boys, reminding them to take good care of the materials and not to hurt each other. She sits down with them, offers suggestions on how to help, maybe helps them aim more carefully. She might encourage them to throw more gently so that they land in the compartments. What do you think her goal is for that? I'm going to give you 4 choices. Why don't you write your answer in the chat box? Her goal might be safety. Her goal might be to sustain the play. Her goal might be to extend the play that they were doing or to enrich the play. What do you think her goal was by going over there and modeling and offering suggestions about how to do what they were doing a little bit softer, a little bit easier? Was it for safety? Did she go over for safety? Did she go to sustain the play, to extend the play, or to enrich the play? Go ahead and write it in the chat box. The last one, I heard enrich. I hear enrich, I hear enrich, all of the above. I picked the one that says enrich, I love it. All right, so to me, I'm gonna give safety and enrich. All right, I'll give one more second in case anybody else has an answer. So to me, when I thought about that, and not that these are right or wrong, I thought that she was trying to sustain the play. The boys had started throwing. She didn't tell them stop, but she told them how to softly and gently continue the play that they were doing. So her goal was to sustain it, to let them continue to do what they were doing, but in a safer manner. So now this teacher comes over with a different way to do it. She comes over and she might choose to facilitate. She might move closer to the boys, remind them to take good care of the materials and not to hurt each other. She might stand near them and make sure that they keep the throwing, that they don't keep throwing, but they start sorting the bears again as they were supposed to. What do you think her goal was? Was her goal safety? Was she sustaining the play? Was she extending the play? Or was she enriching the play? Go ahead and write it in the chat box. Again, was she safety, sustain, enrich, or extend? Safety, 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 extend. Safety, safety, safety. All right. So I thought about this as really, she's really stopping what they were doing and kind of bringing them back to where they were. And her goal, I saw that as her goal as being safety, because she's not letting them continue to do what she's doing. And she's not pushing them to continue it in a different, extending it in a different way. And she's not adding anything to it that's really enriching it. She's bringing it back to let's just sort and put them into the compartment. So I had said, I put that down as safety. The next one is the teacher may choose to co-construct, work together. She might offer them a challenge. She says you can make a simple pattern with 2 different colors of bears in a repeating sequence. And as you build the pattern, you might ask them to say, can you repeat the pattern? Can you make what I'm making? Can you tell me what comes next? What do you think she was doing? Was her goal safety? Was her goal to sustain the play, to extend it, or to enrich it? If she was saying, hey, let's throw them into the bucket in a pattern, do a red bear, then a blue bear, do a red bear, then a blue bear. What do you think? Extend and enrich, enrich, extend. Extend and enrich. And I would agree with those answers. That's definitely what I agree with. So great job. And I have one more scenario. So the teacher might choose to scaffold and support the kiddos. She might move towards the boys and say, how many bears will fit into that particular compartment when you throw them? Shall we count and see? You know, can we might introduce to the actions that go beyond just throwing. She might say, you know, can you throw only the big ones in? So then they're sorting before they throw. What do you think? Is she thinking about safety? Is she thinking about enriching, sustaining, or extending? Extending, sustaining. Yeah, you guys are right on. So think about those different activities and those different things. And you have these kiddos who are now in your classroom throwing bears across the room. We know that children learn best when they're actively engaged in play. We know that when they tend to choose the play, they tend to be more actively engaged in that play. So if you go over there and say, stop, we can't throw that, it's not safe, we need to sit down and do this, are they going to continue to actively be engaged in that play? Or do you think they might get bored? Because I kind of feel like they got bored and that's why they went to throwing. So you want to think about what strategy you choose when you do something, because we want to keep kids as actively engaged as we can for as long as possible. So when we're going over to the kiddos and we're talking to them and maybe they're doing something that we don't want them to do, how can we change that behavior? How can we help that behavior or that activity to keep them involved in the activity but still keep it safe? How do we move it forward instead of just cutting it off and stopping it? Because they're not going to learn if we just cut it off and stop it. But if we continue to move it forward in a safe way and have them continue to do it, then we can continue to improve to work on the learning that's happening. So you really need to think about what is your goal. And sometimes I'm not saying that you can't stop an activity, because sometimes something's just not safe. You know, I had a kiddo once who was trying to climb on top of my cubbies. I understood he needed to climb, but that's not safe. You cannot be on top of my cubbies. That's just not a safe activity. So sometimes you do need to stop it, but think about what is your goal? What can you do to keep those kids actively engaged? And so when you're planning and you're having those conversations, you want to be thinking about that. All right, I'm going to go back and share. I'm going to talk about assessment. I'm actually going to share a YouTube video that I'm going to have you watch for a second. And I want you to think about when you are observing, like, how did the teacher set up the activity? So if you take your learning standards and open them to page 34 and look for the cause and effect construct, and watch this video with the idea that this teacher was trying to teach cause and effect. And think about, how did she set the stage? What materials did she put out for that? Did she say anything to the kids that might help to continue that process? And just kind of think about that as we're moving forward. So this is my first time sharing a video, so I'm super hoping it's gonna work. And so here, go here, go here. Can you see the video?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, you should be able to hear it because I clicked all the right bells and whistles, but we'll see. So I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to.
Here we go. Okay, pick it up. No, sometimes if you just hit the bottom of it, it'll help. Okay, now put it. Whoops.
Oh yes, look at Peter's reading mine.
Uh-oh, I think it's overflowing.
It's melting.
Pretty good, yes. Do you want my plate? Cheddar and Taraki? There you go. Okay.
I want to get a chair.
Okay. Here.
I want to get a chair.
No, I'm not gonna have this down. Let me go. Okay, scoot over to one side, okay? So we've got the computer. Do you need a chair or are you doing okay?
I think I need a lot. I need pretty much. What are the medicines? This one needs medicine. I have to put medicine in there. I need medicine too. Yes, baby. What kind of medicine I'm putting in there? It says pea pie. It says pea pie, baby. It says pea pie means take a medicine. And then you just do. This is my schedule. America's like, that's how you put medicine in. No. Okay, you need that, okay. No, I'm not gonna put. Yeah, keep it down. Okay. I think we're needing more. Here's a bit. Now look at that fat baby. That fat cheese. Hey, I didn't say put some in there. I put them in my own.
All right. So when we watch that, what do you think the teacher set up, or what tools did she put out to help foster cause and effect? Everybody can unmute themselves so we can have a conversation. Beth, I feel like you're talking, but I can't hear you. Oh, maybe you're not talking to me. Sorry. So what do you guys think? It's going to be a super long half hour if we don't talk.
I think adding the chairs, offering a seat, and or another opportunity. I mean, depending on the teacher, you know, like I've worked with teachers in the past who have encouraged kiddos to like stand on chairs, to like raise their, you know, they were dumping the sand or whatever it was into this, you know, the different tools, like adding an extra layer to that. I think she only gave chairs to 2 kids, maybe more, but
I like that she put the beads in there because I felt like the beads, and then they had that funnel, and you could see multiple times that they got, not that they wouldn't go through, but they got a little stuck, so they had to kind of work those beads to get them to go through.
Yeah.
So what other things did she put in, do you think, to kind of work on that cause and effect?
Whoa.
Anybody?
All those stones and the thing that you poured the stones into.
She also had all those measuring cups in there so that they could be filling them up. And so obviously more happened than just cause and effect though. Oops, we have some. You had the little water spinner thing, and I don't know what that's called either, but somebody said the little water spinner thing.
Yeah, that's what I was talking, yeah.
But like a windmill, or I don't know. Yes, I know what you're talking about though. So when we do these observations, the whole point to me is that you watch these observations and you look at what's happening, and then you take that and you use it to direct what you're going to do tomorrow. And you learn from it. So you say, okay, I saw this, this, and this happen. What am I going to do to help continue that learning? So maybe it's as simple as saying, wow, they were really working on cause and effect. I'm going to give them something else to continue that concept. Or maybe it's like, oh, they weren't really getting it. Maybe I need to give them some other piece to kind of build it in there. So what would you do to continue this play? If this was your classroom and you had that in there and you were working on cause and effect, did you see anything or would you do anything that would help you to plan the next day's activities or to plan the next week's activities?
They all seemed really engaged, so maybe swapping out what was in the sensory table for something else and having that conversation about what worked, getting, the beads through, it worked well with sand, will it work with water, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And then think about when you watch that video clip, somebody also said, talk to them and ask them questions. Because definitely when we talk about those conversations, the questions that you give help to build that learning. So just putting a few questions in there. Oh, what happened? Why didn't that go through right? Or what could we do differently that might make it go through better? That came from the chat box. I wanted to put it up. But when you think about what you saw there, there's so much other learning that happened besides just the cause and effect piece that could be what she set it up for. And we want to make sure that when we're making observations, that we're looking at not just what we thought we wanted to say, but also what is actually really happening. That little girl advocated for herself on multiple occasions when she didn't feel like she was being treated, when he was trying to take some of her stones, or when she definitely advocated for herself. So that's definitely part of those things that you want to be making observations for. And, even just having a conversation with her to continue that. In addition, when we use the early learning standards, they can be that tool, like I talked about before. They are not meant to be an assessment tool. So if you walk away with something today, know that the early learning standards were not meant to be in and of itself an assessment tool. But it can be something that when you're observing children and then you're trying to think about how that kind of fits into everything, you can say, oh, I know that this is what's developmentally appropriate. This kiddo's either a little above, a little below, maybe right on task. I know where, and you can use those. Part of why they wrote this on that continuum, where, I don't know if you can see, but part of why they wrote it on this continuum is so that you could see what happens a little bit before, what happens a little bit after. Sorry, my daughter's saying goodnight. What happens before, what happens after, and so that you can kind of use this as a tool. Once you get to know these pieces really well, I don't think that personally I would want to look through a 70-page book once I got to know it really well. So we're going to talk about that on the next slide, about things we can do to kind of move forward and help this and get some really practical ideas out there. Does anybody else have any other thoughts about the video or using it as a resource for observations? Okay, so I'm going to go back and share my screen for a sec. All right, so, and I just want to get to the right slide. Here we go. So remember that putting the early learning standards into your program is really, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I would be completely lying to you if I told you that you could start in your program next week and fully have the standards integrated into your room, because that would be a lie. But what you do want to do is take a second to think for yourself, how do I want to incorporate standards into my room? Is it so that I can have more meaningful conversations with my parents? Is it so that I can either write or choose a curriculum that's really going to support the development of the kids in my program? Is it, so think about that, because only you can answer that question. So think about that for a second. What would you really want to get out of using the standards in your program? And then once you kind of have that in your head, it helps you to move forward with, how am I going to get there? So it's really, once you get to know the standards, they're not nearly as intimidating as it is when you look at the the graph and the chart when you first start out. And there's some things that you can do to help you be more comfortable. Through my work with Child Care Aware of New Hampshire, I've worked with multiple programs now on early learning standards and how they can, and every program that I go to, it's different. And hold on. Okay, sorry. So it's a little bit different what their end goal is for every single one. Some programs told me, well, I really want my teachers to be able to have a robust conversation, because too often they're telling the families, oh, isn't this a cute project? I found it on Pinterest. Well, it might be a really cute project that you found on Pinterest, and there's nothing wrong with that. But why did you choose to do it? What was the goal behind it? You know, this is what we did, but what did they learn from it? And that program really wanted to kind of foster that. And they wanted the standards to be like a stepping stone on how they were going to do that. I've worked with other programs that said, I really want to use this to create my own curriculum, my own program curriculum, and our own form of assessment. And we want to use this to be a resource and a tool to kind of build that off of each other. So, you know, it really just depends on what your goal is. But as you get to know them better, they become easier and easier to use. So one of the first things you can do to help learn them better is to label your learning displays. So if you take pictures of your kids doing different things, or if you, the kids created something and you hang it up on the wall, label it. Label it with what were they doing and what did they learn? That what did they learn could be the construct that we talked about. What is it that they were working on while they did that activity? And it doesn't mean you have to write the contract like it's written in here specifically. If you're trying to get parents to be on board, maybe they won't fully use that language. But how are your families going to understand that? So what did they do and what did they learn? And I have some samples that I'll show you once I'm done talking about each of them. You can also start labeling your centers. I wouldn't encourage you to do both of these things simultaneously because it starts to become a really big project. I would take one of these and start, okay, this week I'm going to label 3 displays in my room. Next week I'm going to finish labeling all the other displays in my room. The week after, I might label my centers. So if you break your room up into different pieces, you might be able to say, okay, I'm going to label my centers so that I might say, this is the block area. Here are 3 things, constructs, that they might be learning while they're in the block area. You know, and if you go through the standards and you start looking at them, I bet you could probably find 30 that they could be learning in the block area. But this is just about you getting to know them. Start with one center and build on it. Do another center, do another center. And then as you continue to get your whole room done, then you can swap out what are those three things that they might be learning in that area. You can create a bulletin board for your families. You can start incorporating standards into the things you send home. Hey, this month or this week, we're learning this, 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 and this. Here's some of the activities we're doing. Here are some of the things they're going to be learning, the constructs or the goals that we have for those activities. You can do the same idea of matching the learning displays with a construct with matching your materials that you have out in your classroom, maybe putting a label on it, you know, and say, oh, these are Unifix cubes. And you can have a little, this is what they learn when they use it. And again, there might be 15 different things that they could learn using Unifix cubes, but you're just choosing one to kind of get there. So let me come and pull something up. I'm going to share here. So if you look at these pictures, can anybody tell me, you can just unmute yourself, what is something that you could put, what are they doing, and one thing that they could be learning? So go through and you can use your standards if you want to find a construct, or you can just tell me what you can do. Sometimes, I mean, you're doing these things every day already, so you may not need to look in the things to find it. So what do you think? I can't hear you. So for me, I'd be like, okay, the kids were sorting and they were matching objects by 2 attributes. And maybe if you don't want to say attributes for your families, you might say it a different way. You know, here's another one. You'd be like, oh, they did fly swatter painting. So you say, what did they do? But why did they do it? You know, they were working on controlling their large muscle groups. They were working on color mixing, whatever it is that your goal was for the activity. This one's like, oh, they were building with blocks. They were working on their spatial awareness. They were working on their, you know, maybe their critical thinking skills or their problem solving skills. They were playing in dramatic play. They were working on having social interactions. They were working on family concepts. You know, all these different things can come into play with those. Oh, lots. I could not see the comments until I took that off, but lots and lots and lots of great comments. So thank you for everybody who wrote in there, and I didn't see it until after the fact. So you can do that same kind of idea with labeling your centers. So you can say, oh, here's my book area. And if anybody wants these, you can let me know and I can email them to you after the fact. But I have, I need to show all my windows. Here's a little thing. You could use a sign like this. It could look like anything, but you know, I've seen teachers when I worked with them where they say, oh, here's my art center and here's 3 things they could be learning. Here's the dramatic play center. Here's something they can be learning. I've also seen people do it where they take it and they use like the Velcro dots so that they can pull the constructs on and off. So they're not reinventing the wheel every time they go to change it out because they're using that to get used to those constructs and the things that they mean. And you can do the same thing for matching your materials and all the different pieces. I will send all 3 of the samples. I can send those out at the end. I'll ask Sue to send them to everybody. So, so let's talk about how would you, if you were going to start taking, so once you do this, the last thing I would do is start saying to use these when you're to build the curriculum. I would get to know it before you, if you wanted to build your own curriculum, know it before you use the standards as a resource, because you really need to know what those constructs mean. There's some other cheats I would tell you as once you get to know what those constructs mean and what those indicators of progress look like in the age group that you work with, I would not fumble through a 70-page book. If I were you, once I know them, you need to wait till you know them, because if you do it beforehand, then you've got these words that you're not really sure what they mean on a paper. But once you know them, I would take a sheet of paper and I'd be like, language and early literacy. Here are the 7 or however many constructs that go underneath it. You know, cognitive development, approaches to learning, here are the constructs that go underneath it. So that way, if you were trying to plan or if you were trying to use that as a resource, you just have a 1-pager that you can look at. When they designed it, they very specifically did it on the continuum. And unfortunately, they don't have anything that can sort it. It'd be super great if they did, where you could just say, oh, I just want to look at the 3-year-old ones now that I know what I'm talking about, but they don't have that feature. But if I were you, I would create it if this is something you really want to bring into your program. Because once you know it strongly, then you just really need a cheat sheet to kind of help you get through and know what you want to pull from it. And so that's a piece that can really help. And then you can use that after you get through to evaluate. Once you know it better, and all those things that we just talked about can really help you know it better, so that when you're trying to build a curriculum and you're trying to see how the standards might be a resource for you, or when you're doing assessments, you've got those pieces kind of right there and you know it so well that you're like, oh, I can look at my cheat sheet. I don't have to fumble through. Because trying to go through 70 pages to find the page that you're looking for really takes time. I'd also encourage you to decide what you want to do as your next steps. Choose one thing. When I work with programs, when they say they want to incorporate the standards, and sometimes you just don't know how you want to move forward with that. So choose one thing that you want to do and say, I'm going to start labeling my displays, and I'm going to take the next month, and by the end of the month, all my displays are going to be labeled. That's a realistic goal. It's not so much that you wouldn't be able to do it. It wouldn't be so overwhelming. You want to really set realistic goals for yourself. Don't do it in such a way that you're like, I'm going to have it done by, Friday. Because that's not going to happen. Who has time for that? Because then Johnny gets sick and throws up on your floor, and there goes your break that you had, and who knows what. You want to set really realistic goals. Make sure that you can accomplish them, and then pat yourself on the back when you do. and get yourself more and more comfortable with them so that as you do become more comfortable, you're able to do some of those cheats that make it a lot easier for you. I don't know if you know this, and I know that things are kind of kooky right now with COVID-19, but Child Care Aware of New Hampshire does work with programs on a one-on-one fashion. We do something called a progressive training and TA program, where we will come in and work with your program on a bunch of different initiatives, but one of those initiatives is early learning standards. And so usually it's over the course of a year, and we'll do some trainings and we'll help support you and your staff to get to knowing how to do this in a way. And we make goals in the beginning. So we sit down and say, here's all the things we want you to do. Here's all the things we're going to do for you. What are your goals and how are we going to get there? So if that's something that you're interested in, I understand right now with COVID, everything's a little kooky, but as we move into our programming in the fall, if we can't do it in person, this is something we could probably do in some sense, like in an online fashion. So just be on the lookout for when we announce our next round of progressives. If that's something that you want, it's free, it's a service that we work with you, and we really try to tailor it when we do a progressive to what your program's individual needs are, because what works for one program may not work for another program. So we really try to work with you on that. So if that's something you're interested in, usually in the fall is when we roll that out. With COVID, I don't know exactly how it's all going to fall into place, but I know that we want to continue doing our services. So it'll probably be in some hybrid form until then. So let me just go back over to the PowerPoint and go to the next slide. So we're getting really close to the end. I do want you to take just a second and look through, I want you to look through the book for me, whether you have a hard copy or you pulled up that URL. When you go through the book, the standards are obviously in there, but there's so many other resources in here that you may not have known about. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to just flip through the book. And I want you to find something that you're either happy that you're excited to see that was incorporated, something that you're surprised that was added in there, you weren't expecting to see, something you think you might be able to use in the future, whether it's for sharing it with a family or use it in your classroom. But I want you to take just a few minutes and flip through the book. When you do that, I know that the standards are in there, so you don't need to tell me about that. I want you to look at the pieces that aren't the standards. Look for those other finds in there that you may not know are there. So go ahead, just take a couple of minutes. We're not going to spend a super long time because I want you to be able to share back out. And then we'll wrap this up and we'll get going and go to bed for the night. So go ahead. I like it when I can see you guys. It's so weird. When I have my screen up, I can't see you and it's very odd for me. When you find that surprise, that I'm glad that's in there, oh, I think I can use that, go ahead and write it in the chat box. I'll put mine in, but I'm not going to hit send until you do. Oh, somebody said they love that there's special ed in there. What else are you seeing that you're surprised or excited about? The special ed piece is really important. I love that. That's a great answer. That's actually, I'll put mine in there while you guys are looking. That's one of mine too. My personal background, I was an elementary teacher before I was in early childhood. I actively chose to go into early childhood. And so I've sat on both sides of the table because I've had a child who had an IEP, and I've been a teacher on that side. But for families and for people who haven't gone through that process, having the kind of outline about that is really super helpful. And for me, I love that if you look at the first page before the domain starts, it gives you a nice sum up of what to expect in that domain. And I really like that. And when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I lived in South Florida, and so I have an endorsement for teaching English to speakers of other languages. And I love that they have a section on dual language learning. I think that that's fantastic and something really nice to say. We've got some other people saying that they love the differences in development page, outlining the milestones and the expectations of children's ages. I think that's great. They like the physical development and health section. The senses of delight and the humor is interesting. So there's lots and lots of resources in this book that are beyond just the standards themselves. Even the resource section is a resource, because if you're looking for more information, say you have that dual language learner, or say you have, prime example, I was subbing. I wasn't even teaching yet, I was young. And I was subbing in a classroom, and I had a little boy come in who was his first day of school, and this kiddo spoke French. He didn't speak one word of English. And I was a substitute. So this poor kiddo didn't know any English, and he's thinking that I'm his teacher and I'm not his person. So having that dual language piece was really, really helpful. And so if I had been a teacher in that program and I needed more information, going to the section that they wrote about dual language learning and looking at the resources that they use, because anything that's in this book has been vetted. They know that it's good. It's a good quality resource. You can use that to help you. We got some other great answers. It looks like it's very descriptive in all the different domains, and it really, don't miss that don't miss out on that first page before the domain. It really breaks down what those domains are and how to use them. I'll give that one more second, and then we're gonna close up because it's just about that time. So I wanna say, if there's any thoughts or questions or concerns, can everybody just shout it out or write it in the chat box if you have any questions. I do know that one person asked to have the center sign sent to them, and we will do that. If there's anything else that you want sent, or if you want like a PDF of the PowerPoint, please let us know. Or if you have a question or want to know more about something, please let me know. Okay, so Sue, can we send out the PowerPoint to participants, and I'll send you the center signs? I'll give you those things. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jen. You really made the early learning standards come alive. You made us dig into the standards from front cover to back cover. I have to share, though, I think the cultural competence piece in the standards is one of my favorite pieces.
And they really, I wasn't on the team. My background, I wasn't on the team that wrote the standards, but I was on the team that helped create the PowerPoint for the standards. And I've also done, so I learned a lot when I did that. And then I've also done a train the trainer. So I've done a 5-hour session for training and TA specialists across the state. So from talking with the people who sat on that, they really wanted to make sure that that had a very strong cultural piece, and that that was really vetted out by gurus across the country. They didn't just write this willy-nilly, like they sent it out to these people to like look at it, which was really cool.
Oh yes, we sent it out to some national experts in the field. And so that was really